conversations if you're feeling anything that you might need some assistance with. I'm joined by my colleague, Sunny Erickson from Vermont Emergency Management. Sunny has been a wonderful colleague as we have transitioned from, the school crisis planning team into the formation and implementation of Vermont's School Safety Center. Sunny and I have been doing this work together for a number of years, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful collaboration between the Department of Public Safety and the Agency of Education. Obviously, 2 days ago in Texas, yet another active shooter incident, and a horrible, horrible thing for that community to have to go through. And I think each one of us, takes pause after this and says to ourselves, when is enough is enough? What aren't we doing that we can be doing? What do we need to be doing? And how can we keep these things from happening in our state and certainly in our community? And prior to 2006, a lot of Vermonters, a lot of our citizens were saying, well, it's just never going to happen here. Well, then it did. And it happened at the Essex Elementary School, in a summer's day in August. And obviously, our communities in our state had to be another dot on a map where we have experienced an active shooter incident. And I think we are blessed in our state to have a tremendous amount of resources, a tremendous amount of folks that take this work seriously, and some great partnerships that we have across the state, both in the private sector and in the public sector. They're really working hard to make sure that we are doing all the things that we can do to prevent these issues from happening and these incidents from happening. And I often say when we do these presentations that if I had $1 to spend on school safety and school emergency preparedness, that I'd like to spend 95 cents of that dollar on prevention, on keeping these things from happening before they take place, and spend the rest of that dollar on response and recovery efforts. And a lot of the information that we'll be talking about today is just about that on the prevention side of the house. So happy to be here. I think we'll probably have about 40 or 45 minutes worth of a presentation, and then if there's time, certainly we'll be able to entertain some questions afterwards. So Sunny, if you can go to the next slide. So school crisis planning, in the state of Vermont is not something that's new. It's been taking place since 1999, back in the day when then Chief Leo Nadeau in the Essex Junction and Essex Police Department began to take a look at school emergency preparedness, and thought that it would be a great idea to bring folks together in his community to discuss school safety and school emergency preparedness. And that kind of grew into the formal designation of the Vermont School Crisis Planning Team, which is a group of school safety stakeholders, about 15 or 20 folks that meet monthly, and folks that represent our law enforcement community, emergency management, our school boards association, principals association, superintendents association, mental health, Department of Aging and Independent Living, a variety of stakeholders that sit around the table and try to bring best practices and contemporary standards and training and exercise resources to our partners so that they have all the resources that they need to protect their schools and to protect their community. As I said, back in 2016, we found that there was a real need to try to bring into one place all of the different school emergency preparedness initiatives that were taking place. And prior to 2016, what we found was there was a variety of information housed under Vermont Emergency Management. Department of Public Safety had some, the Agency of Education had some, a variety of different state and local partners had some. And we felt it was important to bring it under one umbrella so that folks knew that there was one place that they could go to. It also allows the designation of the Vermont School Safety Center allows us to bring in federal funds through that safety center so that we can distribute some of those funds and bring training that's provided by the federal government that we'll talk a little bit later in the presentation through the Vermont School Safety Center. Sunny and I act as liaisons to our communities and to our schools. We are out and about. We travel throughout the state. We do site assessments. We do training. We do tabletop exercises. We really try to be, that one place where folks can go to get their questions answered, and also to provide as many resources to our schools so it can help them with their emergency preparedness efforts. What we have seen in the past is that, this school emergency preparedness is something that principals and superintendents get tasked with. And it's almost one of those other duties as assigned, where we want their primary focus to be on educating, our students. But we also know that kids and faculty and staff can't learn and can't teach in an environment where they don't feel safe. So we know that school safety is a top priority for our principals and superintendents and our faculty and staff. And our role at the Vermont School Safety Center is to try to make that as easy as possible for them. Sunny, next slide. So we have a website that folks can go to that can access all of those resources. And just to talk about some initiatives and some of the gaps that we have identified over the years, and some of the things that we'll talk about here in our presentation. We'll talk about the behavioral threat assessment initiative. And I don't know if folks listened to Morning Edition on National Public Radio this morning, but they had some subject matter experts talking about the value of the behavioral threat assessment process. We'll talk about some of the drills and exercise resources that are available. We'll talk about the drill guidance and how that kind of ebbed and flowed pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and now that we're coming out of our pandemic response, what our drills are going to be looking like. We'll talk about the options-based response methodology, and what I mean by that is moving away from the traditional lockdown and now giving folks options on how they would respond to an active shooter incident. Talk a little bit about the tip line, a Survive Vermont initiative, which is a blending of a variety of federal initiatives that are out there, and then some of the planning resources that are available for folks. Next slide, Sonny. So about a year and a half ago, through the Bureau of Justice Assistance, Vermont applied for a federal grant of around $250,000, $300,000 to bring formalized and a comprehensive behavioral threat assessment training package to the state of Vermont. And as I talked about at the beginning of our presentation, behavioral threat assessment allows us to identify concerning behaviors that have a potential to lead to a pathway of violence. And we felt it was important to get access to this grant funding to not only teach our school leadership teams, but our school safety stakeholders how to do a behavioral threat assessment, and how to not only identify those concerning behaviors, but how to also put safety plans in place that once those behaviors are identified, how do we make sure that they aren't acted upon and we aren't responding, unfortunately, like Texas had to 2 years ago. Next slide, Sonny. It's a two-phased process that we have that's been going on for about the past 6 months or so. It's going to go on into the next 2022 and 2023 academic year. So far to date, I believe we've got about 300 or so folks across the state that are trained in behavioral threat assessment. The first phase is an awareness level training. It's being put on by Sigma Threat Management. It's Dr. Marissa Rendazzo from Sigma Threat Management, and Dr. Rendazzo was the head United States Secret Service psychiatrist that developed a lot of the best practices that are formally used now across the country to do this type of work. And the first iteration in the first phase of the training is an 8-hour course that teaches folks how to develop a team, who should be sitting on the team, and then how to go through the behavioral threat assessment process. And I will tell you, we have seen some great success with this. Schools are really implementing and deploying these processes and these practices in their schools. And I feel like we are doing a really, really good job at getting folks educated and informed about the behavioral threat assessment process. Phase 2 of this grant approach is a train the trainer program, where after we get this training out for about 6 or 9 months, we're going to identify a core cadre of instructors, probably 20 or 25 instructors across the state, from a variety of our school safety stakeholders, from mental health, from Principals Association, from Superintendents Association, from Law Enforcement, School Counselors Association, folks that really have a vested interest in this process. And we felt in order for us to be able to sustain this training, that we needed to identify that core cadre that could go out and do this training across the state for years to come. So we felt that that two-phased approach was the best way about bringing this training to Vermont. I will tell you that if you haven't gone to the training and are interested in it, resources and the identification of the training dates and how to access the training will be available on the School Safety Center's website. It also gets publicized through the Agency of Education's weekly field memo. So we'll try to make sure that come the fall of the 2022 academic year, that we will make sure that awareness training and the trainer training availabilities are made public for folks to be able to attend. We also provide on the School Safety Center a website and through the Agency of Education a monthly training calendar where we try to focus principals and superintendents and faculty and staff on the training that they should be doing on any given month. And we try to take advantage of some of the federal guidance that's out there on Fire Safety Month and Emergency Preparedness Month and those types of things, and dovetail our training into monthly trainings that we provide for principals and superintendents. And we have developed a series of tabletop exercises and voiceover PowerPoint trainings that pretty much folks can plug and play, that when they're having their monthly meetings, they can pop up these training resources and provide that training at no cost and really for no work in developing that training, that they can do that with their school communities. Next slide, son. Just an example of some of the online trainings that are available. And we really do try to be holistic in our approaches. And as you can see, from de-escalation and prevention of violence to, again, some of the voiceover PowerPoint training. We do training on family reunification, incident command, crisis communication. There's just a variety of different training opportunities that are, again, available free of charge on the School Safety Center's website. Talk a little bit about the drill guidance that we have had out there. And let me talk pre-pandemic first. Schools across the state were required to do a variety of what we're now calling options-based response drills and fire drills throughout the academic year. And usually it looks something like this, where in September, they would be required to do an evacuation drill and an options-based drill. And then October, November, December, and throughout the rest of the academic year, they would trade off between fire evacuation drill and options-based drill. So quite a bit of drilling and exercising that was taking place in our schools. And then we went into the pandemic, and we had to worry about social distancing issues and health and safety things as a result of the pandemic. And so we backed off from doing our in-person enforced evacuation and lockdown drills and options-based drills, and made those more discussion-based drills where folks could sit in the classroom and talk through some of the things that they would need to do to keep themselves safe in a variety of different situations. There's been a tremendous amount of conversation and discussion about the anxiety, stress, and trauma that is induced when folks go through these types of drills and exercises, and a lot of national attention. I'm hearing a lot of background noise. There an awful lot of Can folks hear me okay?
Yes, can you hear us?
Yeah, I just was hearing a lot of background noise. I think we're better now. So a lot of the stress and anxiety induced as a result of those exercises. And so at the Vermont School Crisis Planning Team, we're really starting to rethink the guidance that's going to be provided for, the next academic year. And we're really trying to listen to our mental health providers and our law enforcement professionals and the subject matter experts on school safety and training and exercising to come up with a methodology that has the intended outcomes of providing the tools to make sure folks can respond appropriately without inducing a significant amount of stress and trauma when folks go through the exercising. I will tell you that as we came out of the pandemic in March and early April, there was some new guidance that we put out that no longer were the discussion drills enough, that we were requiring now for folks to move back into those in-person and actually moving people, out of the building during the evacuation, and some of the options-based response exercises for the month of May and June. And that new guidance will come back out to schools in early August as folks, begin to start their next academic year. We talk a little bit about the options-based response methodology, whether you call it run, hide, fight, or ALICE, which is alert, lockdown, inform, counter, and evacuate. What we know by looking at past incidents, that there is no one type of response that's going to be good for every single situation. We know that we have to provide folks options, and Sunny and I and a bunch of our other school safety experts, when we have gone out to do this type of training with faculty and staff and our student population, in an educational environment, folks want a lesson plan. They want to be told that if I do this, I'm going to be able to get to the desired outcome. And unfortunately, when we do our analysis and research and after action reviews in the situations and the tragedies that have taken place, well, we know that it's not a one size fits all type of response, that's going to keep people safe. So we needed to make sure that we had options available for folks. And I know that prior to the guidance coming out, that we were highly recommending that schools follow the run, hide, fight methodology, that there were a bunch of schools and school districts that had bought into the ALICE, strategy. I will tell you that the methodology for whatever options-based response methodology that you're going with, the tenets of that are the same. You've got three options. You can either run, you can hide, in the traditional lockdown type of configuration, or you can make that individual life-saving decision where if it comes to that, you have to be prepared to protect yourself and to protect those around you. And I know that those are the difficult conversations when we sit down and we talk with faculty and staff in our school leadership teams. We start worrying about, well, how can we have one school doing one thing and one side of the school doing another? How can the first floor of the building be doing one option and the second floor of the building doing another? And I always come back to that, you have to go upon what you know at the time that the situation is taking place. And there's two words that account for that, and it's situational awareness. We have to be aware of what's taking place around us. And if it's better for us to just get away, then we have to exercise that option. If it's better for us because the threat is so close to us that we can't get away, that we have to lock down. And I always like to say that it's lock down and reinforce. It's not just lock down and hide. It's lock down and take whatever measures that you can take to protect yourself. Or if that threat has now come through the door and it's making itself present to you, then you've got some of those individual decisions that you need to make about, what are the options that you're going to exercise. And these are very, very difficult conversations and things to walk through. As I listen to some of the students after a variety of these tragedies, you hear from them that they have to worry every day when they walk through the doors of their school, that is today the day. And I worry about the anxiety and trauma that we have when we're talking about this and exercising and drilling this. But I also worry that if we don't do this, are folks going to be prepared to respond appropriately, if and when it does happen? So it's finding the sweet spot about how we deliver this training in a way that, again, doesn't cause more harm than good. Our law enforcement partners have been actively involved with our schools and our communities in getting this training out. I would say for, those folks that are having some concerns or some challenges about how to have these conversations, I would collaborate with your law enforcement partners. They are very good about helping with this type of training, but we really have encouraged and strongly encouraged our school leadership teams to move away from that traditional lockdown methodology and move into the options-based methodology like a run, hide, fight, or an ALICE type of block of instruction. So I talked a little bit about the Bureau of Justice Assistant grant that we got for behavioral threat assessment. We also received around the same time frame about $300,000 for the Department of Public Safety to stand up, develop, and implement an anonymous school safety tip line. And it's just one more way for folks to be able to report suspicious or concerning behaviors that, you know, potentially may have a negative impact on our school. You know, it's not to be utilized to report you know, things that aren't of a safety and security concern, but certainly we have received reports like that. There are folks that sit in our school safety partners that vet all of the information and all of the tips that come through our tip line, and then make sure that if it needs to be actioned and something needs to be done because the information has some credibility attached to it, that they are the group that works to point that information and to get those resources to ensure that you know, if there is a credible threat, that it gets action 24 hours a day. Those tips come in through the Department of Public Safety. And as you can see from the slide, there's a variety of different modalities that those tips can come in, you know, whether it's via the phone or text or an online submission format. It really is kind of a 360-degree way that folks can submit those tips. I will say that the more opportunities and options that folks have to be able to report these concerning behaviors, the better off that we will be. And if it's whether somebody's telling a trusted friend or a colleague about a concern, or we see a social media post and it goes through the behavioral threat assessment process, or it comes through the anonymous tip line and reporting process, it's just one more way for our schools and our communities to report those types of behaviors. And we have seen some successes with this. That came out in the middle of the pandemic, and we understand that there were some communications challenges with it. I would say that you will see a broad distribution as school starts in fall of the 2022-2023 academic year, that this will become more widely publicized, so folks are a bit more aware that this resource is available to them. Sunny, I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit about the great initiative coming up this summer, Survive Vermont.
Thanks. Thank you, Rob. So Survive Vermont is a community caretaking program that we are very excited to be rolling out in the next couple of months. This is a Department of Justice funded program, and what we are doing through Agency of Education and Vermont Emergency Management, Department of Public Safety, is we're rolling out this program that was originally established up in St. Albans, and we've taken that training module and we're now you know, rolling it out through the state. And what this program is going to do, it's community partnership between, you know, the state of Vermont and the communities that have stepped up to say, yes, we want to, you know, bring some really good training out to our communities. And what we are doing is we are partnering with first responders in communities. We've targeted 6 to 8 communities, but I think that we will be able to spread it a little bit more broadly than that. But we are collaborating with the first responders in these targeted communities. We're inviting the not only the community in which these trainings are based in, but also the extended communities that surround them. And we are bringing these 3 federally funded and created programs. So the 3 programs are the See Something, Say Something campaign, which is basically situational awareness, like Rob talked about. If you see something that's concerning or you hear something that's concerning, let's identify how you report that concerning behavior. And then there's the Run, Hide, Fight, which Rob covered a little bit ago. And also the third piece is the Stop the Bleed. So that is in the unfortunate scenario in which you are in a situation in which you might need to know how to help, bandage or address some mass wounds, you will be able to receive the instructions on how to tourniquet or how to, address these significant events. So we are partnering with these communities, and local law enforcement will be, speaking about and instructing on the see something, say something, and the run, hide, fight. And then local EMS agencies are going to be demonstrating the stop the bleed and how to do that. We've partnered with the Vermont Department of Homeland Security to allow people to sign up for Stop the Bleed kits. And really, it's an awareness campaign, a way that you can know how to respond to an emergency if it's in your community. And it gets all folks from different areas in the same room. So you have a common language, a dialogue that you could have previously established, because those are going to be the folks that are responding to emergencies. So being able to have those approaches in which to address an emergency situation is going to benefit your whole entire community. And we're very excited to be rolling that out. Like I said, we have identified 6 to 8 communities. I foresee that we will be able to, expand that beyond those communities, and really it's a great training, and we're really excited to roll it out.
Sonny, I see that we have a couple of questions. I see a hand raised, and I saw something come through the chat. If you can see the chat, can we entertain a couple of those questions before we go to the next slide?
Sure. I see that Jan from Chittenden Emergency Management Director said, is there any funding to improve cell coverage at local schools? Our local school has minimal cell coverage, as we discovered during an evacuation.
Yeah, I will tell you that, the infrastructure and the cell coverage is a common concern around the state. I will say that, Sonny, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, right after the Fairhaven incident, that there was a bulk of money that Governor Scott had allocated, and cell phone boosters were one of those things that were a part of the grant approved funding available. I am not aware of any state or federal school safety grants that are available right now that would cover that. I do know that some of the pandemic recovery funding, I believe, highlighted some of the infrastructure improvements, and cell coverage and cell priority was one of those. But directly to schools, I'm not aware that there is any additional funding, to answer your question.
Right. And she also, Jan, followed up saying, as an EMD, I feel there's not a strong connection between schools and local EMDs. Are you inviting EMDs to those Survive Vermont trainings? And I will answer that like, everyone is invited. It's a community approach and a community-wide training. So we want folks from education communities, the first responders are going to be there. Anyone who is a stakeholder in their community and wants to, receive this training and be a part of it is welcome to that. And we will be advertising and doing some outreach to promote those in each of those communities.
Sonny, and I would say too that, in a lot of our guidance, especially when, a year and a half ago, pre-pandemic, when we had the, that large initiative of the state's planning, training, and exercise school safety initiative, the guidance that we always give out as folks are developing their crisis plans and their comprehensive emergency operations plans and doing their drilling and exercising is local EMDs should be absolutely partners in that planning process. So if you're not, I would encourage you to get involved. And if that's something that you need some assistance from me to make sure that superintendents and principals are aware of that as an opportunity to collaborate, then I'd be more than happy to help with that as well.
Yes, I completely agree.
Any other questions, Sonny?
We have a hand up from Allison Stroll.
Hi. I've been trying to think of how to phrase this without sounding like a total jerk, but frankly, I feel like this is not good enough. I have a son going into into elementary school, and I'm terrified. I think there needs to be a huge investment in making our schools safer, like not letting these people get into the schools. And I feel like this shouldn't be grant funded. It should just be like there is an investment in for the public schools to make their buildings safer. And I don't have a solution for it, but just saying like a group of elementary students to basically, well, you got to just kind of fend for yourselves until the police get there. It's just not good enough. I don't have a solution, and it's very disturbing. But I mean, how can a classroom of little children protect themselves? It's just luck of the draw, and it's disgusting. And I really think there needs to be a good look at the safety of the building. And I think we should really start there.
And I would say that is what we're talking about now is a portion of the school emergency preparedness process. Physical security systems and technologies and building safety and access control and visitor management and security cameras are all a part of the practices and policies and guidance that we have put out to schools. And you mentioned getting into schools. I will tell you that for years it has been a best practice, and schools have been strongly encouraged to lock all of their exterior doors. And if doors are open, that they're monitored so that folks just can't walk through the door. That has been a best practice for years. I do know that some schools are challenged with the funding from local school boards and budgets on what they can do for infrastructure hardening and that type of thing. But those types of practices have long been, where we are advising folks to be on a building standpoint. And what we're talking about now, as I said, is just one part of the process. It really is a holistic approach that starts, quite honestly, in the community, moves to the parking lot of the school, moves to the front door of the school, moves into our hallways and our classrooms, and moves into our community of educators and faculty and staff in our student population. So I hear your pain with that, and I couldn't agree more. We have to do more, but this is what we're talking about today is just one part of the holistic approach that the state of Vermont has taken on school emergency preparedness.
And I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone looking at this, and everyone knows it's a problem. It's frustrating because you just want everyone to be safe.
And I hear you, and it's scary as heck. And I had 3 kids, my own children, that were in the Essex school system when that shooting took place in 2006, and it pulls at our heartstrings. And I don't think a day goes by where all of us doesn't question and wonder, how do we do it? How do we do it better? And I think we have to continue to challenge ourselves. So I appreciate your commentary there. Thank you.
I also want to put out there that Rob and I, as school safety resources, are available to schools. We do infrastructure walkthroughs to see, if there is a place that needs better lighting, if there is a place that should have more cameras. Do you have, a locked entry? And when we walk through these schools, we're able to identify places that could use some improvement. Unfortunately, right now we don't have any funding sources to do those things, but we can walk through individual schools and say, these are some great things you're doing. These are some areas where maybe you want to put some funding or give some attention to. As school safety, officers and liaisons, we're able to help schools on an individual basis by doing walkthroughs to, view their security and offer some solutions for areas that could use some attention.
Yeah, and Sunny, these are really challenging. These are challenging things, and budgets are tough, and finances are tough in our community, and it's tough at the federal, state, and at the local level. But it's the question of what's enough, and then what's too much. The reverse side of this is we don't want our schools to feel like institutions and correctional facilities, and yet We don't want what happened 2 days ago to happen in our school as well. And it's a blend, and I get it. And I feel the more we talk about it and things like this, the better we will be. So again, I appreciate the commentary.
Yes, thank you, Allison.
Any other questions, Sunny, before we move on?
I don't see that there are any other hands raised, but we can certainly take a minute if folks have some comments or questions.
Okay, next slide, Sunny. I think it's the next one, Sunny.
Oh, sorry.
So as we're talking about what communities are doing, there's been a tremendous amount of national conversation. When there was the defund the police and the reimagining police, really challenging conversations about where law enforcement is in the nation and in our state and in our community, which brought up, the conversations of school resource officers in our schools. And I will tell you that, I'm a former law enforcement professional, and just because we have school resources in our schools does not mean it's going to prevent an active shooter. We've seen it at Virginia Tech. We saw it at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, where law enforcement has been on campus and those situations have still happened. And it really is a community decision about if that is something that schools want to have, is having a law enforcement uniformed armed presence in our schools. And right now in our state, there are very few sworn law enforcement officers that are functioning full-time in a school resource officer capacity, meaning 40 hours of their work being dedicated to being a school resource officer. And there's a tremendous amount of training that goes into being a school resource officer. You just don't put a patrol officer into a school and say, now you're magically a school resource officer. They go through 40 and 80-hour blocks of training about how to communicate, how to instruct, how to be a mentor, how to be a coach, how to train, how to educate, and how to be a community partner inside a school. And communities are really struggling with what's the best fit if we're going to have cops in schools. What is that going to look like? And I believe the numbers right now are under 40 school resource officers in the state. And unfortunately, a lot of those school resource officers for our more rural communities are in communities that have full-time police departments. The Vermont State Police does not have a school resource officer program. It's usually communities like a Colchester or an Essex or a Hartford or a Rutland. Some of those communities that have full-time police departments that are putting those resources in the schools. And then there has been over the last couple of years a significant pushback from community members that folks feel like there's an infringement on folks' safety just because law enforcement is present in those schools. And so there's a challenging conversation that we're all having about what's the appropriateness of having sworn law enforcement in our schools across the state. So the school crisis planning team worked with our Chiefs and Sheriffs Association to put some guidance around if we're going to have cops in schools, types of training that they should have, memorandums of understanding that the feeding organization should have with the supervisory union in the schools about what are the duties and responsibilities that police officers should have in their schools, and just kind of putting the operational framework about what they're supposed to do when they're in the schools. So it's good conversations to continue to have. I feel like we are back on the swing of wanting and needing more police officers in our schools. But again, that's left up to the communities and the community conversation about if that's a good fit for what they want their law enforcement resources to be doing. Next slide, son. I'll come back to just, some questions and answers again, after just a couple of closing comments. I will tell you that, I've been doing this work for a number of years, and I'm very, very proud of the focus and of the prioritization that the Secretary of Education and the Commissioner of Public Safety and Vermont Emergency Management has on school emergency preparedness. I feel like it's been a priority, is a priority, and will continue to be a priority. But the threat has a tendency at times to change, and the way that folks go about doing these horrible things changes. And because of that, our ability to respond at times has to be very, very flexible, and we have to change our methodologies based upon how those threats change. And if you look at the way folks have, gone about doing these things, where at times it was, getting into the school and in the hallways is where those shootings were taking place. Well, 2 days ago, the person barricaded themselves in a classroom. And now because of that, we're going to have to change the way, we're putting some guidance out about our responses and how we're going to respond to these types of critical incidents. So I know folks at times get frustrated because we're constantly changing. And that's because we have to, based upon what we're learning as folks begin to evolve in the way that they deliver this type of devastation to our communities. I will also say that I like to think of it as a community caretaking approach, that it's not just the superintendent, it's not just the principal, it's not just a faculty or staff member, it's everybody plays a role with that. We just have to be mindful that if we feel like something is not right, or we overhear a conversation, or we see a social media post, it's our duty to report that. It's our duty to tell somebody about that, so that we can put the pieces of the puzzle together to try to stop these things before they ever happen. I wish there would come a day where we didn't have to have these conversations and talk about school safety. Unfortunately, for the foreseeable future, I just don't see that we're going to be at that point. But I am very proud about the work that's been done and is being done, and I very much appreciate that this was a topic of conversation to talk about in this virtual day of learning. So, Sonny, if there's not any other questions, I'll entertain any other feedback from the community.
I don't see any other questions or hands raised, so I think that we are all set, and we are just at break time. So thank you everyone for coming into our room and participating in this really important subject matter. Please reach out to Rob and I. I'm going to put my email in the chat, and Rob's as well. So reach out to us with any questions that might pop up as you think about this presentation today.
Thank you, Sonny and Rob. We appreciate it. And I checked with the room here. We're all set on questions here.
Okay. Thank you
Thanks,
so
everybody.
much.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.